So we're scraping wood this morning because we're going to do something of an unorthodox start to the passage. I know you're used to unorthodox starts, but you're not used to this unorthodox start. So today we are still looking at the unseen. And what I want to do is go sort of back in time here and look at this picture from Jacques Tissot, a picture in his imagination of the young Jesus before he goes into ministry. Because he worked for his dad, remember? He worked for his dad, and he was a carpenter, and he made stuff. So Tissot wondered what Jesus would look like as sort of a 12 or 13-year-old carrying wood through town, and this is his imagination of what that is. I really like that. It's sort of fun. And I like the people on the side, too, because it's like they know something other people don't know, and they're watching this kid who, is supposed to be some big deal, and all he's doing is he's making, ox yokes, and that's what he's doing. So anyway, it's kind of a great picture. The reason I do this is because before we get to the passage in the New Testament today, I want to wind the clock back over a decade, back to when this Jesus right here isn't 12 or 13, but when he's about 19 or 20. Now, we don't know anything about him when he's 19 or 20 either, although we guess that he might have been transitioning into the head of the household. His father Joseph might have been gone, because by the time the ministry starts, Joseph's nowhere. So we don't know what happens to Joseph. Presumably, since Jesus is the oldest son in the family, he would take over the family business. He would run the household. That might have been his position when he was 20, but I want you to think for a second, what would Jesus have been like when he was 20? About 20, because two other things happened that year he's 19 or 20, and those are going to lead us to the story today. The first thing of the two things when he's 20 that happened somewhere up in Galilee, which is where he is a young girl is born. Woohoo! And she's a delight to her parents. It's kind of a quiet event. It's not heralded anywhere, but she is born to this fellow who happens to be a moderately well-placed leader in the local synagogue there around the Sea of Galilee. And she's born to them, and she is just a delight to them. That's event number one when Jesus is around 20. Event number two is the fact that there's a woman who's an adult woman who at the time, if I can put this delicately, had her time of the month, you might say, and the week of that time of her month dragged on, and then suddenly an alarming thing happened. Her discharge went past the normal week and went into the next week, and then it went into the next week, and into the next month. And then through the rest of that year, and then for year after year after year, she was not relieved of that discharge. Those are the two events, and those are the two people today who are going to collide in Jesus' life. 12 years later, 12 years after Jesus was about 19 or 20, they're going to collide in today's passage. The young girl that was born in that year and the woman who started over a decade of bleeding. Same time. So that's our imagination about Jesus. So we're going to go 12 years later, and 12 years later, we come on this scene where, well, you know the famous scene where Jesus goes across the Sea of Galilee to the east side, and he gets over there, and there's this demon-possessed man who has the demon named Legion, yeah, because there's many of them, and he's super uber powerful, and they try to chain him up because he's so violent. He breaks the chains and all that kind of stuff. That's happening over there on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, in a place we call Decapolis. And the people there don't know how to contain this guy. Jesus comes across in a boat with his apostles. He lands on the shore. He confronts this guy, says, "What's your name?" And then they beg him not to be sent into the pit, but to be sent into the pigs, and then the pigs run down the hillside there in the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee into the water, and they're all dead. And then the people that live in the village are a little freaked out, number one, because Jesus just killed a whole flock of pigs. That's an economic issue. But number two, they have never been able to contain this wild man on the shores. Violent, but this man, Jesus, came across in a boat and contained him. That freaked them out. Who is stronger than that man on the seashore? Jesus is. So they ask him to leave. He kills pigs, and he's more powerful than this guy on the shore. Who knows? Who can contain him? We'd like for you just to leave. Of course, the guy who had the demons in him is in his right mind. He's all clothed. Remember all that stuff. He's right. And he asked Jesus, can I just come with you? Can I just come right back across the lake? I want to be with wherever you are. And Jesus says a surprising thing in that part of his ministry. He says to him, don't be quiet about it. He says to him, go back to your village and tell everyone in your village what God has done for you. That's one of the few times he does that in his entire ministry. Anyway, so that was just a distraction to get your attention. So then after that happens, he gets in the boat and he goes whoosh, back to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, over on the western side, which is where most of the action happens in the New Testament. It's on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. There's some small towns that rim about the northwest quarter of the lake. If you go around, if you think of the Sea of Galilee as a clock, 9 o'clock is Tiberias, 10 o'clock is Magdala, 11 o'clock is Gennesaret and Chinnereth, and about midnight is Capernaum. Got it? There'll be a test at the end. Anyway, so he goes back across. We don't know which one he goes to, but he goes back across the lake. And when he gets back to the other side of the lake, there's a huge throng of people that are there. Huge throng of people. And he is immediately met by a very desperate man, the father of the little girl 12 years ago that was born. And this father comes to him and says, my little girl is dying. She's on the brink of death. On the brink of death. You need to come right now and lay your hands on her so she doesn't die. Well, all these people around him. And so Jesus actually complies, says, okay, let's go. Lead the way. Let's go. And so they turn and they start to walk away from the seashore. And they're going to go take care of this guy's daughter. By the way, this man's name is Jairus. Yeah, Jairus. So he's the leader of the synagogue. So they take off and they go to the house. His daughter is deathly ill. She's 12 years old. That was 12 years ago. We saw Jesus when he was 20 when she was born. So they take off to do that. But the crowds are so thick that it's a little tough moving. So while they're moving, that's where we get to our scene today. While they're moving, let me just put this in. He says, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. So that's his appeal, and Jesus responds instantly. He doesn't delay. But here's the problem, and this is where it gets to our scene today. In Mark 5, this is in 2 other Gospels as well, but we're going to follow Mark's account principally. Mark 5:24, the great crowd followed him and thronged about him. Followed him where? Well, they're going to Jairus' house. They're going to go find this little 12-year-old girl who's dying. She's in her last breaths. She's dying. There's a certain urgency in this story. That's why you have to get that in your head, a real urgency. Well, the great crowd followed him, thronged about him, and there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. So this is the other woman we saw back 20 years when Jesus was 20. The young girl that was born, that's Jairus' daughter. The woman who started bleeding, that's this woman right here. And for those next 12 years, she's been bleeding, and the little girl has been growing up. And now we have these double crises happen when Jesus comes back from the Gadarene area on the other side of the lake, and they collide in a way because Jairus says, come heal my daughter. She's going to die if you don't. And then this woman figures, this might be my only chance. So in the crowd, she sees her opportunity, and Mark tells us she had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. 12 years. 12 years of hoping, spending money on physicians, trying what they recommend. Nothing works, over and over, not just for a couple months, for 12 years. She's plagued by this. So she had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. Now, this is a great picture from Tissot, but I kind of object to it. You'll see why in just a second. But actually, one of the reasons is, and you can't see it now, is the color of the stones of the buildings is wrong. Because the color of all the stones in the buildings in Galilee was black. Because it's igneous rock, it's lava rock. If you see the stones down in Jerusalem, it's all limestone, it's white. So he's a little bit wrong there. He's also wrong about where she's touching him. And you'll see why in just a second. So anyway, she comes up behind him. This huge crowd that's trying to urgently go to Jairus' house gets stuck as Jesus stops right here and she touches him. Well, I want to take a detour before we find out what happens. Matthew 14, now this is sometime later. This touching the garment fringe of Jesus is not an only time affair. Later on, maybe about a year later, you look at Matthew 14:34. When they'd crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. Gennesaret's right about there. Okay, that's 11 o'clock on the clock. Gennesaret, and when the men of that place recognized him, they sent around to all that region and brought to him all who were sick and implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched it were made well. So this had become something of a tradition. As Jesus would come into the area, they'd say, well, just come in, and Jesus, we won't bug you, we'll just kind of touch the fringe. Well, the first time we see someone touching the fringe of his garment is this woman right here. So she sets that pattern today. But this set me on a little detour. Can you kind of, humor me on a slight detour just for a second? This fringe thing is my detour. Well, let me just show you this. This is a picture of the high priest back in the Old Testament. And the high priest, we've just been reading about the high priest and having a blast talking about the high priest. But there's very specific rules about what the high priest wears. Did you know that? And there's some wonderful symbolism in what he wears. Like, for instance, and this is directly from God. God's very specific about this. He says the high priest who's going to intercede for the people for atonement, one of the things he's got to wear is he's got to take two kind of rectangular onyx stones, like black shiny stones, put one over his right shoulder and attach one to his left shoulder. And on the name of these two onyx stones, these black stones, a professional engraver engraves the 6 names of the tribes over here and the other 6 names of the tribes over here, so that as the high priest came into the presence of God to atone for the people, these dark representations of the people would face toward God. He actually bared the weight of their sin. I mean, these pictures are really cool. And then that's not the only place the names of the tribes are written. You can see it right there. He's got this breastplate. And the breastplate doesn't have black stones. It has huge multicolored stones, unique 12 stones right on his breastplate right here. And on each one of these stones uniquely is named each tribe. And all the 12 stones. And in the passage, it says, God wants the high priest to wear these stones so that he bears them on his heart. So simultaneously in the symbolism of the high priest, you see that he bears their sins where God can see them. He bears them on his shoulders. And he also holds the names of the tribes close to his heart because of love. It's a great picture. So you can take the entire regalia of the high priest, and God has put it together deliberately to teach you something. Well, it's clear when you look at these. That's because the people of God are on his heart. The people of God, he's bearing their sin for them. I mean, it's really great. He's actually got a golden plaque on his head, which Tissot leaves out here. And you know what's written on that golden plaque on his forehead? Holy to the Lord. Which means he's set aside by God to do just God's work. Right on his forehead. Oh, really, really cool. But what I want to look at is the fringe. See, that's Jim's detours for the day. Because Jesus, as our high priest, he had people coming up and touching the fringe of his garment to be healed. Well, did you know that there's a huge amount specified for the high priest about what's on his fringe? So this is your challenge for today. I don't have an answer for what I'm going to ask you, but this is one of those things that I've spent my entire life just, this is interesting. I wonder what this means. So I'm going to infect you with this wondrous little thing, and I want you to spend the rest of your life trying to figure out what it means. Really? Yeah, okay, hold on. Here we go. Right here, down at the fringe down there, there's a close-up of the fringe down there, right along the bottom of the fringe. God said very deliberately, I want something on that fringe that's very specific. And because it is specific, God's teaching us something about who he is, what the kingdom of heaven is like, what the high priest does, who is Jesus. He's teaching us very specific. Do you know what he put on the fringe of the high priest costume? Well, first, you can only use blue and purple and scarlet red thread. Can't use any other colors. And with those colors of thread, I want you to attach and embroider on the bottom of that an alternating pattern of pomegranates and bells. See, I see faces full of insight. No, because this is what I've wondered about. Pomegranates and bells. And they had to be in an alternating pattern all around the edge. Well, the bells we have some explanation for, because we know that the bells, they were gold bells. As long as the high priest was inside the place that no one else could go for atonement, you could hear him moving around, ding, 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 and you knew he was okay, right? There's action going on your behalf in this place that you can't go into. Although I've wondered, see, Jim's into details and side trips. How do golden bells make sounds? Because wouldn't a golden bell go dunk, dunk, dunk? It must be an alloy thing, huh, Jeff? Alloys? I don't know. Okay, but that's not as curious as the pomegranates. Pomegranate, bell, pomegranate, bell, pomegranate, bell, pomegranate, all around the bottom. I get the onyx stones on the shoulders. I get the breastplate symbols with all those stones with the names. Pomegranate, bell, pomegranate, bell. Well, what about pomegranates? Well, when you look at fruits in the Old Testament, there's you always see in a cereal collection of fruits, you see the vine, which is grapes, you see figs, and you see pomegranates. What's that?
Seeds of life.
Seeds of life?
Come off a tree.
Yeah, if you've ever opened up a pomegranate, it's like full of seeds. According to the rabbis, this is the rabbi's opinion. I don't think I go with this, but you'll find this interesting. According to the rabbis, there was 614 seeds in every pomegranate, matching the 614 laws in the law. Okay, see, that's why I don't go for that. But I mean, it's an interesting thing. But it is a curiosity. It was a curiosity to the rabbis. It's a curiosity to us. And now today, this woman is touching the lower fringe of the great high priest. Now, he doesn't have pomegranates and bells on his garments, but he is the great high priest. So this is what brought me to this curiosity. And again, I don't have an answer to this, but she and then all the people who come to Jesus after this are all touching this fringe, this lowest part of the garment. And in God's symbolism, that area has pomegranates and bells. So there's your challenge. What is God trying to tell us? And when you get a good answer, let me know and we can kind of share that together. Wasn't that a weird detour? I'm into weird detours. Okay, pomegranates and bells. Okay, anyway, she touches his garment and she touches it because she says, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. Okay? Now, it's actually a social affront to touch someone kind of up here. It's like coming up to someone and say, excuse me. And Jesus is hustling with the crowd to get to Jairus' house. So you don't do that. You don't actually touch someone like up there unless you know them. You don't touch them by the arm or or whatever. So really, she has to be low to the ground anyway because she has this discharge. And technically, she's an outcast from the society. If you look at Numbers 5, it's very clear. Numbers 5:2, it says very clearly, if someone's a leper or they have a discharge or they've touched a dead body, they live outside the camp. It's just very clear. So she's one of those. She's just like the leper last week. She's an outcast. So she has to sort of sneak into the crowd because she is an outcast. And if she's sneaking into the crowd, it could very well be that she's sneaking in and because of her humility, she's going low. So I like the picture that Tissot has here where she's going low. And maybe that's why when she reaches out, when you're low, you got ankles and you got the hem of a garment. So that's actually something of a clue in terms of the high priest garment too.
I know with the lepers, if they did try to interact with the other people, they were supposed to say unclean.
Unclean.
Now, did she have to say something like that?
That's not specified that she has to say unclean. All it specifies is that she has to live outside the camp. So I think there's a loophole here, is what it is, because she can sneak into the crowd unless they know that she has a discharge, they don't know that she's unclean. But every person that touches her, and in this crowd, that's everyone, she makes them unclean. So it's kind of a lowbrow intrusion into Jesus' space. The hem of a garment for the high priest or for Jesus himself is the part of the garment that's closest to the dirt of the earth. So that's a big clue as well. That's where your garments will normally get dirty down there. If you walk during those times without any paved streets, there was just dirt on the ground and dust, and your feet and your sandals got just icky. So when you laid down to have dinner and your feet were right behind the other person eating on the pillows, you wanted to make sure those feet were clean. However, the bottom hems of garments got dirty. So there is a sense in which, even on the high priest garment, I'm giving you a few hints right here, that the part of the high priest garment that doesn't represent God in heaven as much, but actually touches earth and gets dirty with the dirtiness of mankind, is celebrated with bells and pomegranates. Just work on that. It's a great question. Anyway, so she's touching way down here. So she's touching up high where the sits of his prayer garb are up here, but she should be touching down there. Okay, and if you see the color of the buildings, They're light colored. They should be dark. All the buildings in the north are dark colored. Okay, anyway, so if I even touch his garments, I'll be made well. Now, the way Mark and Matthew and Luke talk about this, they talk about what she's thinking right here as an innovation. This is an innovation in the thinking. Because after this, like we read later in Mark, it turns out that everyone came to touch the hem. But it looks like she, because of the language, is the first one to touch the hem. It looks like. It sounds like. So she figures, what I'll do is I'll do a sneak attack on Jesus. Okay? I'll be unseen. As these guys have an important mission they're on. They're going down the streets. They're going to Jairus' house. He's the leader of the synagogue. I don't want to get in the way of this. So I'll sneak up behind. I won't stop Jesus. I won't even say anything to him. And I'll just kind of surreptitiously go, and I'll be out of there. And then be gone and no one will see me. I don't want to impose on anybody. So she's trying not to stop the flow of the movement of what's going on here. She can sense there's great urgency. Jairus, a very important man, is very urgent. He's really insistent. You got to come. My daughter's this close to dying. And she's only 12 years old. Come on, Jesus, let's go. And so she's just, it's actually a very good strategy. So she sneaks up, she goes low, and she just does the and figures, got it. Immediately, the flow of blood dried up. 12 years. 12 years. All of her income. And she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And she's thinking, perfect, I'm out of here. And sneak off. Don't stop the flow of this big procession. I'll just get what I need and go away. But that doesn't happen, does it? Verse 30, Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? This is the humor part of the passage. But if you think about it, I mean, this is an important thing right here. Jesus he's moving with everybody else, and they're on their way to Jairus' house, and it's very urgent. I can see Jairus ahead of the crowd saying, this way, come on, let's go. And then all of a sudden in the middle of that, Jesus says, ah! Who touched me? Who touched my garments? See, that's what immediately turned about in the crowd. So he was facing Jairus. He was following where his house is. And then suddenly he stops and turns around and says, okay, who touched my garments? And I'm sure at that point, Jairus is going, dude, we got to go. This is a stupid question. Come on, my daughter's dying. Let's go. This isn't important. What do you mean, who touched my garments? And of course, his apostles sort of make fun of him. 31, his disciples said to him, look, you see the crowd press around you, huh? And yet you say, who touched me? Hello? Let's go. Jairus' daughter's almost dead. What are you doing? I'm sure everyone at this point in the crowd is totally flummoxed about why we're not going full speed ahead to Jairus' house. And Jesus says, who touched me? And his apostles said, well, like maybe everybody? What are you talking about? And he looked around to see who had done it. Now, this point right here in the drama of the scene blows me away. Because his apostles are saying, what do you mean, who touched you? And Jairus is saying, let's go. And then Jesus turns around and he looks behind him because he turned around. He looks behind him, which we know that's where she had come from. And then he starts to just survey the crowd. Can you imagine Jesus doing this? And can you imagine you're the woman who's trying to get away and goes, right? And he's doing this thing. She thought she could sneak away. She can't sneak away. If everyone stopped, if I get up and run right now, that everyone will know it's me. The drama is really great right here. So he looks to see who's done it. Luke adds something quickly here, which I really like. Luke 8:47. And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she thought she could just kind of fall away in the crowd, and she was hidden, and she wouldn't be seen. But when Jesus starts his laser scan, she realizes, jig's up. He knows. Verse 32 of Mark 5, and he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. She wasn't going to sneak away. She tried not to be seen. And this is why this is the last in our Unseen series. She did not want to be seen. And she figured she had accomplished what she wanted to accomplish by touching his garment and not slowing down the whole parade to Jairus' house. She thought this was the most thoughtful thing to do. is just to and then let them go and sneak off, and we're really good. And actually minimize the contact with other people. If I just sort of sneak away, they'll go that way. I'll go this way. Everything will be fine. And Jesus says, stop the truck. Who did that? And so she finally realized she's been outed. She comes to him. She comes down before him, fear and trembling. Now, why would she be in fear and trembling? Well, in a certain kind of way, this feels kind of like theft in a way. Like I came and took something from you and I'm out of here. It feels, was it the right thing to do? Should I have come to him and stopped him? I don't know. So fear and trembling, she comes to him, she falls down before him, and then she just tells the whole story. Okay, here's the deal, Jesus. Back when you were 20, when you were working in your dad's place, I started this flow. Okay, it's been 12 years since then. It's never. And so she just dumps the entire story in front of him, and she said, "And I figured if I just touched the little hem of your garment, I didn't want to make a big ruckus here, but I knew that would be something. That would be something." Yeah. So she tells the whole thing to him, and he says to her, "What were you thinking? You stole from me my secret powers and you didn't even ask. Do you think that's right to do? Do you think that's right to do?" No, that's not in the Bible. Jim just made that up so you'd say, "Oh, I hope that's not in the Bible." No, that's not what he did. Because what he did was just beautiful. "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." So tell me about her faith. What was her faith? As simple as that. If she touched even his garment, she would be well. She doesn't have to make an appeal to him. She doesn't have to say, "Pretty please, Jesus, pretty please, I've been good this week. Please heal me." She doesn't have to do any of that stuff. She doesn't do any appeals at all. All she has to do, she said, "I knew if I got close enough to touch the hem of your garment, I'd be okay." Had the faith of a mustard. That's the wonderful thing about her faith. It is so darn small that Jesus says, but you got it right. You got what you knew about who I am. You got that right. You knew that I am actually that great high priest who's come to bring healing from broken hearts and physically. You knew that much. And you knew that if all you did was touch the hem of my garment, we'd be good. That's an incredible amount of faith, even right there. Because most of the people at the time wouldn't even give Jesus the time of day, let alone say, if I get close enough to him, he'll heal me of a 12-year disease. So she knew that much was true. Go in peace, be healed of your disease. And that's the end of the story. And her name is? We don't know. Doggone it. I get miffed when I go, "Do you know all about the woman with the discharge?" That's such a bad title for the rest of your life. And I always imagine that in heaven we'll be able to kind of rub shoulders with some people we know of, and she's going to introduce herself when you say, "Well, my name is da-da-da," and we go, "Yeah, so? I'm the woman with the discharge." However, as embarrassing and indelicate that is, I think for the rest of her life and maybe even into heaven, she'll walk around and say, "I was the woman with the discharge, and Jesus healed me." And that won't be a sign of embarrassment. It'll be a sign of great joy about the grace of Jesus. When I felt like I was sneaking in and sneaking out, and he wouldn't let me go. And by the way, there's a lot. We can do a lot of wrap-up thinking about this, and I'm going to do this now and do a little bit more wrap-up. But one of the fascinating things about her doing this, I asked myself, when she was healed, why didn't Jesus just go, "Okay, we got to keep going," and just like she's healed? So why stop the entire parade? Why not just be satisfied with the fact that she's healed? Her faith has made her well, but we need to truck onto Jairus' house. That's what we're doing because his daughter's this close to dying. Come on, so we're getting things done as we go. It's like multitasking. Why didn't he just keep going? Why did he stop and turn around and confront her? Why? And say what he said. "Your faith has made you well. Go and be healed." Why? Wouldn't we get to the same end of the story? She's healed if he just ignored her and kept going? However, what you understand in all of this is that what God does for us in his grace, whether it's healing for us or all the things that we count as just tremendous benefits from the hand of God, He doesn't just do it to improve our living situation. He does it to introduce himself to us. So Jesus couldn't let this go without introducing himself to her. And you know this when you give gifts to someone, like on birthdays or Christmas or something like that. You get all excited about this particular gift you're going to give. And you want to give this gift because it says something about your love, your consideration, your care for that particular person. So you give it to them, and then suddenly you're saying without words something about your heart and love for that other person. You want who you are and your love for them to be reflected in the gift. It's relational. But no, when I was a kid at Christmas, there was no relation in all the gifts that I got at Christmas. It was like, hey, look at this. I got a model of a destroyer. That's the best thing in the world. I'm going to glue this together tomorrow, and it's going to be wonderful. And there's absolutely no thinking at all about the giver of the gift. It's just the gift. And so in our wrecked society, in our culture that's fallen by sin, we put so much emphasis on the gift itself and forget about the giver. And so Jesus, in this particular case, the gift was given. She's healed. And he wanted to stop and say, let me introduce myself to you and let you know that it wasn't because you were just smart about the fringe of the garment, but it's because your faith in who I am. That's what's going on here. So if you extend that in a larger sense, when we pray for things, many times we pray for the things without asking to be drawn near to God in the midst of asking for the things. Because many times when the thing is given, then the opportunity for a relationship with God kind of goes away. As soon as you're made well, it's like, okay, I'm good. Thanks, God. Psst, bye, we're out of here. And it leads you a long term, if God does that over and over again, it leads you long term to consider God as being some kind of vending machine of healing and blessing. And so you come to the vending machine, you stick in some quarters and pennies of prayer and holiness, and, I didn't kick the dog this week, and all these coins. How many coins does it take before what I ask for from God, and I pull the thing, and it comes out to me? Well, I don't know, I guess I got to be holy enough, and I do it enough, and then God says, okay, you got it, cha-ching, and then God's just out of the picture altogether. He's just a vending machine for what you need. However, God knows that you need things, and he wants us to come to him, but he wants us to come to him not just to fix the thing, but in order to draw near to him. And Jesus wouldn't let this particular case go without connecting with the woman. See, that's what's beautiful about why he stopped the entire parade and put the life of Jairus' 12-year-old daughter in danger. But was it really? Okay, I'm going to stop and do another kind of wrap up right here. That's the ailing woman. I don't call her the discharged woman. I call her the ailing woman. We're at the halfway point in the 4 series. And right here we're doing the 4 unseen. She wanted to not be seen. And Jesus says, I'm going to see you anyway because I want you to see me and I want me to see you. I want to make this connection. So sometimes there are people in our society who don't want to be seen, like this woman, for various reasons. And they try and hide out and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to God's intent with us, he wants us to see him and him to see us. He wants that because he's a relational God. So just to kind of go back, we talked about her. We talked about the lepers the week before, how they were unseen because they had to go unclean, and stay far away. We talked about children in general from an adult perspective are unseen. And yet Jesus says, look, don't stop them coming from me, because if they do, if you stop them from coming to me, it'd be better for you if we stuck a big stone around your neck and dropped you in the sea. Don't stop the kids coming to me. So the children actually are an extraordinarily high visibility value to Jesus. So see the kids, notice them. And then at the beginning of this, we talked about Hagar. And Hagar, as the servant girl of Sarai, the wife of Abram, Hagar had the best news in all of this series. When she was out and completely abandoned out in the desert, left to die, God comes to her and she says, I'm going to name this place the God who sees. The God who sees. The well of the God who sees. Okay? Be'er Lahai Roi. That's Hagar. He's the God who sees. And so she says that back in the time of Abraham. And then all the way through the Bible, the Old Testament and the New, those who aren't seen by society are seen by God himself because he loves us. And then we preceded that with a series of 4 lonely people. We ended with Peter, who in his denial of Jesus was the loneliest guy on the planet because he denied Jesus himself. At least he felt like the loneliest guy on the planet. Mephibosheth, the guy in the Old Testament, the young son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, the king, who technically should have been the enemy of David. And when things settled out, David said, who else is alive in Saul's household? He goes and fetches Mephibosheth, who's hidden out of fear. He's going to be killed because he's a rival to the king. And David says, nope, you're coming into my house and you're going to sit at my table every night and eat with me. That's an antidote to loneliness. And then before that, the woman at the well, remember her? She was embarrassed about being there. She was lonely because no one in the village would pay attention to her. She had a track record, and that track record caused her to be lonely. And then originally we looked at Zacchaeus, little Zacchaeus up in the tree, who had shafted all his friends and family in the village and probably had no contact with anyone because of the sin and evil he'd done to them. Loneliest guy. And Jesus stops in that procession and says, Zacchaeus, today I'm coming to your house to have dinner. Ticks everybody off. But the loneliness of Zacchaeus is stopped right there. And because of what Jesus does in Zacchaeus' life, I think it opens up his ability to relate to the village again. So that's what we looked at. Now, these two topics of these four, those go together. You notice that? When you're lonely, you feel like you're unseen. When you're unseen, you feel like you're lonely. Those go together. These are really dynamics, understanding who God is in terms of his love for us and how he sees us and he draws us near to himself. That's what these are about. God sees, as Hagar named that well place, and God draws near. Those two things go together. And so when I talk to people who don't know about who Jesus is, they don't know about the gospel, the good news, I tell them all the time these two things. I want you to understand that God sees where you are. He sees where you are. How do you know that? Well, I could tell you a lot of stories, but he sees where you are, and if you reach out to him, he will draw near to you. He will. He will. And in fact, it's the fulfillment of this. In Acts 17, when Paul is talking to the pagans in Athens, he can't use religious words because they don't know anything about the Jews. When he's talking to them, he says that God made mankind so that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he's actually not far from each one of us. That's the purpose of mankind in God's creation for us, is to say, is there a God that's there? And when you reach out for him, even the clumsiness of stumbling around in a dark room, which is what that word means, even when you don't know what you're doing, even when you're not informed about what you're doing, God will let you find him, even though he's not that far from you. And that idea is encapsulated in this unseen and loneliness. And I tell people this all the time. You know, I guarantee you that if you cry out to God, say, God, I don't know where you are. I don't know much who about you, but I'm groping in the dark here, that he'll let you find him. And that actually is replicated in the Old Testament and New. God is a God who wants to be found. If you search out for him, if you look for him. Now you notice that in many of the cases of these things right here, some of these people, both the lonely and the unseen, some of them were passive and didn't want to do anything, but many of them actually did the first step to reach out. Even Hagar was like that. She cried out in the desert. Basically, God, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. Am I just going to die? And in that crying out of her heart, God comes to her and says, I see you. I see you. There's a well. Go back to Sarai. Wow. So there's a lot here about people reaching out. Now, Mephibosheth never reached out. He was just hunkered down in fear. He's going to die as soon as he went out in public. But many of them reached out. The well woman reached out after she got approached by Jesus. But many times Jesus took the initiative. God takes the initiative. He did with Zacchaeus. He did with the woman at the well. David did as a type of Jesus with Mephibosheth. And Jesus himself even took the initiative with Peter when he was isolated because of his failure. So he'll take that initiative. Over here, Hagar was reaching out. The children don't reach out, but Jesus says don't get in their way. The lepers did reach out, and the ailing woman did reach out. So all I'm saying is that there's a point at which in everyone's spiritual journey that they get to a point where they understand God sees me, God understands my condition, I need to reach out, and he'll respond and come. And he will. And so that's why I just love this series right here. And there's so many more people that tell us about God's loving kindness for us, his sovereign understanding and care for us, and his response to bring us near to himself. I mean, it's really great. Now, we're going to go on in two more the fours, and we're going to look at the doubting four and the faithful four. And this is something, these are different characteristics that happen after you come to Jesus. So those other ones were before, these are after. So is it good to doubt? Is doubting a sin? Were there some that doubted and were still kind of okay in God's eyes? Or is doubting something that should just be totally off the map, you know? And isn't doubting the opposite of faithful? So if those are questions that are rising in your mind, we're going to look at 4 people who were doubters and 4 people who were faithful. And the ones on the doubting list, you can probably guess. You know who some of the doubters? Yeah, like Doubting Thomas. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. There's other doubters. You'll recognize all of them. However, the faithful ones you probably will not recognize. Really? Aren't they the superstars? The faithful guys? They're not the superstars. But what constitutes faith and what constitutes doubt, that's what we're going to clarify as we look at the 4 and the 4 of the doubters and the faithful. That's what we're going to do. Okay, so we're going to pick that up next time. Oh, there's an epilogue today. There's more to talk about because, hey, we left Jairus hanging. Well, yeah, so what happened there? Well, his daughter died. No, she didn't die after. You guys, you need to object sometimes. Well, Jim, you're lying to us. Let's look at the epilogue with Jairus. So, well, yeah, I know. That was a trick question. That's why everyone went, well, oh, never mind. 35. So while he was still speaking, in Mark's dialogue right here, as well as Luke's and the others, Jesus is still talking to the woman. They haven't progressed an inch down the street. Daughter, your faith has made you well. That's still hanging and bouncing off the buildings in the alley right there. While he's still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said to Jairus, your daughter's dead. So why trouble the teacher any further? I mean, she's gone. She's gone. And of course, those of us who've read the New Testament say, yeah, but Lazarus and Mary and Martha. But for them, you know, unless Jesus gets there before she dies, she's dead. And so before they even get a chance, it looks like in the dialogue, for Jesus to turn around, face forward again, and start moving forward, someone has come to Jairus, who's probably leading the parade, and said, you know, she's dead. So just don't bug him anymore. To give up. Just give up. But Jesus turns to Jairus and says, don't fear, only believe. Don't fear, only believe. And with those words, Jairus turns and leads the procession to his house. They get to his house, and as they're approaching the house, the place is just surrounded by mourners. You remember how they did that? There would be musical instruments. There would be paid professional mourners. Oh, those kind of people. So those people were all there. Just a big ruckus going on at Jairus' house. Exactly, just like that. And they get there, and Jesus is somewhat taken aback by the scene that he sees right there. And he says to the people that are around the house, he says, wait a second, she's not dead, she's sleeping. And their response is laughter. Oh, they laugh. Are you kidding me? They laugh. You got to be kidding me. We know dead people, and she's dead. Jesus says, okay, we'll see. So he goes into the house. He tells all the other people to come out of the house. You read this in Mark 5, actually, but I'll just give you the plot spoiler. They go into the house, and Jesus says, let's go inside. Everybody else out except mom and dad and Peter, James, and John. And we're going to go into the room where she is, and there she is laid out right there. She's looking pretty dead. She's looking really dead. And at that point, they're devastated, the mom and dad, as they see her again, and they realize, and they're probably thinking what Mary and Martha had thought. If you had been here, she wouldn't have died. But there was this woman that stopped you on the road. You know, all these conflicting thoughts in their heads. And there's a little girl laid out, 12 years old, not quite a woman. And there she is laid out. And then Jesus does one of the most touching things in the entire Bible. The child's not dead, she's sleeping. And then he comes up and grabs her hand and says, Talitha, come. Little girl, rise. Little girl, rise. And she sits up. One of the best scenes in the Bible. Can you imagine if you're mom or dad and you're there kneeling and crying and seeing your daughter laid out, lifeless, and without any hope, and thinking that Jesus just made a big error, he delayed in getting here, and now she's gone. Our 12-year-old is gone. And then for Jesus to touch this lifeless hand and say, Talitha, come. And she sits right up. Yeah. It all turned out well. And this is one of the first times in the Gospels that people realize that Jesus can do more than just heal diseases. Is it possible he actually is more powerful than death itself? And this is where it starts to spread. I just love that scene. So on this particular day, 12 years after Jesus is 20, working in the carpenter's shed, this little girl who was born 12 years ago and this woman who 12 years ago started hemorrhaging both find life in the one who loves both of them. It should have been a train wreck that day, and Jesus made it an amazing thing. By the way, as we finish this and we look at that picture, I want to encourage you, if you've never reached out to Jesus, never done what like this ailing woman did, where she just said, I've got enough faith just to reach out and touch the hem. And if you've never done that, you can do that very simply and reach out. The prophet Joel in the end of the Old Testament says, all those who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. I would just encourage you to do that, even if your faith is only this big. And so what are your needs? But I got to warn you that when you come to him with your needs, fully in faith, understanding he can fix you, he's also going to insist upon meeting you. And in that meeting, you'll find out that the best thing you ever did was ask for healing, because not only were you healed, but you found the Savior. It's as simple as that. I would encourage you to do that. Don't stop being hidden, and let him see you and let him draw near to you. So we're going to close with this, because this is such a great song to illustrate this. Well, what we do, Lord, from sorrows deep I call, when my hope is shaken. Torn and ruined from the fall, hear my desperation. I can hear her saying this. For so long I've pled and prayed, God come to my rescue. Even so the thorn remains, still my heart will praise you. So as we sing this last song, I better go back to here. As we sing this last song, think about her and think about you when you called out to him for healing, how he came near to you, how he healed you, how he brought you near to him. And he sees and he hears and he draws near. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for this tremendous story. We thank you for this very dear woman. And Lord, we thank you that when we call out to you, you answer. Even when our faith is minuscule, you answer. We know that you see us and you see our situation. You see our desperation. You see our loneliness. And Lord, we're even trying to hide many times. Lord, I pray for those who are desperate, that they might find you in that reaching out, and that you might draw near to them and embrace them and bring life where there was no life, and to bring light where there was only darkness. And Lord, our minds go back to Mephibosheth, dear Mephibosheth, who not only was brought into the king's house, but honored with a place at the table, his name on that chair every single night, and honored by the king himself. And Lord, you do that for us. You bring us into your presence. We sit at your table, and we have a place set for us to be with you. You are so good to us, and your grace to us is amazing. So thank you for this great story of grace today. Amen.